Welcome back to the program. The whole issue of gun control and gun rights is coming to a head in Congress. There's a number of proposals going around, and we've talked about those proposals here on this program, and I've written about it on several occasions on my website at JimBrownUSA.com. I just wonder if we're not marginalizing the problem or limiting the scope of the problem if you look at the proposals that are on the table. Congress now seems to be gathering around background checks and maybe reducing the size of the clips or the magazines that go in these assault rifles. And both would have some restrictions on them. Let's put aside, for the sake of this argument, the Second Amendment, whether you're entitled to have these clips, whether you're entitled to all of the attributes of freedom of carrying a gun, like a lot of people argue. And I'm a strong proponent of gun rights, having grown up in a part of the state where we've hunted and fished and needed guns for our own protection. I've talked about that before. Let's put that debate aside and see if you were trying to get to the problem, to the point of what happened in Sandy Hook, of what happened in Aurora, Colorado, the movie theater, of what happened with Congressman Gabby Gifford. One thing flows through those issues and most of the other serious shootings, the Virginia Tech student. All those people would have passed a background check. They were not thugs. They were not hardened criminals. Everyone would have passed a background check. So saying you should have a background check, to me, is kind of window dressing. Sure, it would weed out some convicted felons, those who use guns in armed robberies or murders, and there would certainly be a tool that would help law enforcement. I think everybody agrees on that. But you're really not solving the problem if all you're talking about is background checks and smaller clips. If you're going to fire 30 or 40 rounds, you can only use 10 clips, 10 rounds per clip. Well, you put 2 or 3 pistols in you. You carry 2 rifles. I think almost as much damage would be done anyway. Now, what I'm getting at is something that my daughter pointed out to me and pointed out to the country this past week. She wrote Campbell, my daughter, who a lot of you know was on CNN and hosted the Today Show on weekends for many years, wrote an op-ed piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. She regularly writes for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. And in this piece in the Wall Street Journal, she said, maybe we're missing the point. Put aside background checks, put aside the clips, and let's talk about the people who do the shooting. They're mentally deranged. They've got massive mental problems, and nobody in Congress is talking about that. We're talking about everything under the sun, but facing the fact that many people have serious psychological problems that we don't address. There have been some proponents that we have a psychologist that looks at these marginal kids and at a very young age and tries to identify those who might be a problem. But nobody wants to do that. It's going to cost a lot of money. You can pass a law saying, well, everybody's got to have a background check. That doesn't cost any money. Only have 20 rounds in your clip and 30. That doesn't cost anybody any money. But you're not going to solve the problem unless you deal with the fact that there are a number of psychotic individuals out there who can cause a lot of problems. And then you take it to the next step. What causes that? Well, in many instances, it's hard to put a firm pencil on why there are people go off the deep end. But you can look at the video games, look at the movies. Do you know that the Federal Communications Commission does not regulate television programs when it comes to violence? They just don't do so. There's no requirement that they do so. The ratings for movie theaters are a joke. The PG-13 rating is given to all types of violence. Now, if there's a kissing scene or a little sex, oh, that's R-rated. We can't touch that. But when it comes to violence, what's that Van Diesel movie I saw here recently, saw a few clips of? I mean, they're cutting people's heads off and blood is gushing everywhere and murder after murder. And even the new Bruce Willis movies and the Rambo movies are all, Stallone movies are all full of violence and blood and guts. And you let a young person sit there and watch that day after day, week after week, and it's going to have an effect. The message is, hey, this is how the tough guys live. Even the good guys cut up people and shoot them and mash them up. The good guys do that. The latest James Bond now has turned to be a pretty vicious guy. And if that's the model we are setting, then there's no wonder that some people, a lot of young people, go off the deep end. Nobody wants to talk about it. President Clinton didn't do much along this line when he had a good relationship with Hollywood. And now look at Barack Obama has raised millions and millions of dollars from Hollywood. He could pick up the phone and tell the Steven Spielbergs and all these other fellas out there and ladies that make these movies, look, I know you support me, but we've got to put some limits. We've got to have a discussion about the violence in movies, about the violence on TV, and certainly the violence in these video games. And if you don't do that, you're really not getting to the crux of the problem. So I compliment my daughter. If you want to read her op-ed piece, you can go to my website at www.jimbrownusa.com. She's there on a live interview on NBC, and her column is also there about dealing with these issues, dealing with the violent video games that are not regulated at all, dealing with the motion pictures that get a PG rating, that are not PG at all. They ought to be X-rated, some of the violence there. And of course on television where there's no ratings at all. We got to change this if we're going to any effect at all on the violence that leads from these distributors to influencing young people and causing these mass murders to take place. I think it's a top priority, but so far Congress wants to turn and look for a quick fix, and it's just not going to work. Be back right after this message.